Everyone, I'm Ava Sadeghi, the CEO and co-founder of Symba. Symba is the leading remote internship platform for students, connecting them all around the world. I'm joined today by Jonathan Gottfried from Major League Hacking, Carlos Vera from Our Interns, and my amazing co-founder, Nikita Gupta from Symba. The format of the event today is going to be a discussion. Really, we want to be very authentic and honest of what is happening in the world. Many internships have been canceled, many programs have moved remote. So it's been a very challenging time to adapt so many of these in-person and experiential learning opportunities that were often hosted in the summer in-house. And so we're trying to get creative here to give students a new way and opportunity, and also help employers embrace what remote work looks like. So this conversation is incredibly important to share how work is evolving, how many nonprofits and advocacy efforts have come around to address these issues. So in light of the current climate, that's why we brought all these leaders together today. And in addition to addressing remote opportunities, all of the leaders we have here, also Forbes 30 under 30. So we get it. We're also all young. Like, we resonate so much with this issue. Like, we've all just recently graduated within the last 5 years. Like, we understand the experience that a lot of our friends are going through. So this is something that we are passionate and truly care about. With that, I'm going to have everyone give themselves a nice introduction. First, I'm going to pass it on to Jonathan. I'd love for you to give us a little background about yourself, MLH, and some of the initiatives you're working on this summer.
Awesome, thank you. I'm John Gottfried from Major League Hacking. I'm one of the co-founders there. So Major League Hacking is the global community for student developers. We've been around for about 7 years now, and we work with more than 100,000 students a year to help people learn technical skills outside of the classroom. So really, whatever the counterpart is to academic learning, like workshops, hackathons, club meetings, mentorship, many different programs that typically take place on campus and in person. Obviously, as I'm sure we're going to talk about, and everyone has personally experienced, we've transitioned all of that to a virtual format, and a lot of interesting challenges there. But before MLH, I actually worked as a developer evangelist at Twilio, doing technical marketing and community building, and was a web developer at a bunch of different companies before that. The only interesting fact about me is that I actually have a history degree, and so I'm kind of a self-taught programmer and went through that whole transition. And I love to cook, and I have worked in kitchens before. So yeah, and I'm doing a lot of sourdough. I do have a sourdough baby in quarantine.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jonathan. I did not know that you actually had studied history, but that's really awesome to hear. My background also is social impact, so I came from kind of a different background, but it's been really cool to be in the tech sector. And as you know, we're really big fans of the work that you're doing. And also now wanted to hand it off over to Carlos from Our Interns. Carlos does amazing advocacy work, and we're so grateful that you could join the conversation with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled to be speaking to you all. So I'm an immigrant from Colombia with an O, not a U, and grew up in California, was part of the Army Reserves, went to college, and then did 3 unpaid internships. So I know the struggle firsthand. And Our Interns is kind of always evolving, but it's about advocating for interns, both in the public sector, the private sector, and additionally making sure that opportunities are equitable, which I know we'll be talking about. And yeah, so that's a little bit. And then the last thing is, we're known for having gotten Congress to pass $15 million to start paying interns.
Yes, we are such big fans because it's so important. I think that one of your Twitter posts recently was, you can't pay your interns, you shouldn't have interns. So we are very much in alignment, and all internships on Symba are paid. And now I'd like to pass it on over to you, Nikita.
Thank you, Ava, and so great to speak to everyone today. Thank you all for attending. I'm Nikita, the co-founder and CTO of Symba, and what we're doing is we're building a remote internship platform that's helping connect companies with the best talent from around the world and helping them manage the entire remote internship experience. I studied computer science and engineering and was really passionate about technology and making an impact in this space. I've done a handful of internships myself, ranging from Martha Stewart to at Apple, as well as Bank of America and a couple of startups. So I've had great experiences, and the internship opportunities for me have helped me define what I want out of my career. And we're really excited to be supporting a lot of internship programs this summer. And yeah, that's me. I was born and raised in New Jersey. My parents are from India, so definitely made the career path of going into the tech field.
Thank you. And to kick it off for our first question, I'm going to actually direct this question to Jonathan from MLH, and would like to ask, how many of the programs, that have been canceled this summer and all these activities that were typically done in person, especially with MLH being very involved in hackathons, what ways are you seeing that companies are adapting and embracing this challenge? And how has MLH also been a part of being the solution this summer?
Yeah, so, in a typical year, we're doing thousands of in-person events. Everything ranging from like a small 10-person gathering to a huge like multi-thousand person, extravaganza. And all of that evaporated, right? Like it's all had to transition. And it happened pretty abruptly. One of the things that we, started working on almost immediately when we started sending everyone home from our office was, how do we support hackers in a virtual format? There had been online competitions and developer challenges for a really long time, but we felt like really strongly that it didn't have a lot of the educational or like social benefits that having an in-person event has, like networking and meeting people and trying something new. And so we set out to like really redesign how we handled virtual events and try and come up with a new format that better reflected what you got out of an in-person event. And so that's been ongoing now. Like we've really had to learn as we go. Like we basically committed to running at least one hackathon every single weekend and transitioning all of our workshops to a virtual format. And every single one gets better than the previous one based on what we learn. It's going really well though. I think that there's definitely a lot of tooling that we've discovered or kind of played around with that's helped a lot. But on the corporate side, like how are our partners and other companies adapting? In many ways, it seems to be a moving target. I think a lot of recruiters that I've talked to had the rug pulled out from under them and basically had to figure out how to run a virtual intern program or not at all overnight, which I'm sure you'll talk about more later. And they've been swamped with figuring out that transition, right? Like their normal on-campus activities like info sessions or interviews or career fairs or hackathons, have suddenly been replaced by like a frantic scramble to figure out how to even support interns, period. I think for developer teams, like developer marketing, developer evangelists, they were able to adapt a little bit more quickly because they didn't necessarily have other responsibilities, right? They were able to start creating content and working with people in virtual events fairly quickly. And so all those like awesome mentors that you see on campus from engineering teams, like they had a pretty natural transition to a virtual format, and we've been really lucky to have their support still. But it's a work in progress, right? Like I don't think anyone was fully expecting what was going to happen. Some people were better prepared than others, but I think we've certainly been learning every day at a time.
Well, that's great to hear. And before I pass it on over to Symba to kind of answer and share some of their experiences about scaling, what are some of those key learnings that you talked about? Like you said, things that you learned and you're iterating on as you've moved remote.
Yeah, so one of the things that we really had to think about was previously our events took place on a regional level. So you might have one event in San Francisco and another event in Mississippi and another event in Bangalore, right? Now that they're virtual, everyone at all of those events is participating at the same time. And so one of the key learnings we had early on is how do we support people in part of a singular event across many different time zones? And what does that look like as a participant if you're on a team with someone who's 12 hours ahead of you? And so that's been a really interesting challenge. The way we've kind of tackled it is actually leaning really heavily on tools like Discord and Zoom. Discord in particular is an interesting one because it's often used for gaming communities, which is not really what we typically are. But we've been able to tap into a lot of features they had around very specific segmentation of people on a chat server, and being able to say like, hey, everyone in this time zone, here's what's going on right now. Hey, if you're looking for a teammate, like we're going to have 3 different opportunities for that, every 6 to 12 hours, and kind of adapt to that format and adapt to that, global engagement. I would say the other thing that has been really, really key is finding ways to still have fun in a virtual format. Like for me, going to a conference or going to a hackathon or going to like any kind of in-person event is largely about the people who are there. And replicating that virtually is really difficult. And so we've come up with a lot of like games and activities and icebreakers that are explicitly designed for something like Zoom or Google Hangouts that I think just like make the experience more enjoyable. Like it's not just about learning or getting a job, it's also about making connections and having a good time. And so that's been one of the more fun parts of the learning, right? Is like coming up with those activities and designing them and testing them and playing around with it.
Thank you for sharing that. I definitely will need to pick your brain because that's something we do get asked a lot is like, how do you make it fun? A lot of these are social activities in person. Nikita, I'd love for you to share some insights on how you've seen companies adapting their internship programs this summer.
Of course. And so thank you, Jonathan, for even mentioning that. Like companies, they were like immediately overnight had to make the decision of whether or not to either keep their internship programs or transition to a remote format. So there were a lot of challenges, and one of the biggest challenges that companies talked about is that, first of all, how do we engage all of the interns and make sure that they're having an experience that's very similar to what an on-site experience is? So statistically speaking, about 80% of the internships have changed, and more than 40% of them have actually adapted to a remote format. And a lot of companies are now able to scale their internship programs because they're able to offer more remote opportunities when they're not having to spend money on relocation or pay for an intern's desk. And it's been quite fascinating to see how many companies are now getting really excited about offering these remote internships during the summer and streamlining that experience and helping them onboard the interns, giving them projects, keeping them engaged, and seeing how they can scale that program. And we're really excited that we partnered with Our Interns this summer to launch our Save Internships campaign. And that also helped us give opportunities to students whose internships were rescinded and help them also match up with other open opportunities that were given here. And a lot of companies are now understanding how to bring their internship programs remote, and as well as how to scale them and give more opportunities to students. That can be based from anywhere, increasing the diversity that the students are coming from and not just focused purely from where the cities where the headquarters are focused.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a perfect segue on the notion of Save Internships to hand it over to Carlos to talk about your experience in advocacy efforts and supporting students during this time. In addition to Save Internships, Carlos and his team have launched the Intern Opportunity Fund, which I know had so much demand that they actually had to shut it down within I think the first 24 hours of opening it up. So I'd love for you to share more about that program and maybe some of the stories of students you've been able to support.
So I'll start off with early March. We started getting emails and messages from interns being like, hey, I'm being terminated while being kicked out of my dorm, and just all this chaos, right? And I remember calling you and I'm like, we were both talking like, this is gonna look bad. This is gonna be really bad, really bad situation. We actually commissioned a poll March 24th, and it showed that of the 70% people that their internship got canceled, 80% feared financial security. And I started talking to some donors and they're like, oh, it's not going to be that bad. And then we clearly have seen that, this really has changed the whole landscape. So, we're really excited that we partnered up with y'all for the Save Internships campaign. In terms of what we've done is, we've noticed trying to push some of these corporations are not always helpful because you mentioned, Jonathan, they're all kind of doing their own thing right now, and working on things on the fly, it's kind of chaos. So we've focused on the internship, opportunity fund, And like you mentioned, we got 1,000 applications within like 3 days. And we kind of had to shut it down because collectively they're asking like $1 million. And it just really shows that, the need is great. So the way that it works is you can list how much you need, and it ranges from $150 up to $1,500. And it's about helping folks do unpaid internship this summer, or those that got their internship canceled. And the stories are so heartbreaking. We have a grantee, her name is Lizbeth, Northern California. She just graduated high school, got a paid internship, it got canceled, and her mom is a house cleaner that's undocumented, and she got her hours cut. And Lizbeth, as a college student, didn't qualify for the CARES Act, and nor did her mom because she's undocumented. And she was talking about like, I need to help my family of 4 so that we can pay the rent and feed ourselves, right? So that was one person. Another one, this actually just happened last night, is we ended up giving $1,500, which is the maximum, to someone in New York. Her name is Nandini. She's a college student. Her parents had been unemployed for an entire year, and her internship at an international NGO, I can't say the name, you can take a hint, they cut her stipend. And she's saying like, I have to pay rent right now because the moratorium, whatever, of New York, it expires tomorrow. So we literally had to like Venmo her $1,500. So it just, there's so many stories. And I think one thing that's really important to notice, obviously I'm preaching to choir here to students. A lot of folks see internships like sometimes as like being part of a book club. Like it's nice if you have it, but you'll survive if you don't. Like I've seen some posts like, oh, if you don't intern this summer, then just like read some books and learn something new. Like for some folks, like they help their family, like they're trying to survive. And it really serves as that pivot point towards economic security. One of the last things I'll mention is I have noticed that some applicants, because they have to attach where they're interning, they're mentioning it was paid, my employer switched to virtual, now it's unpaid. And we have a big problem with that, like MAIP fellowship. They did that, right? And we had 8 applicants that are currently doing that internship ask for funds to like buy groceries. So I think that's a really big problem. Like I understand that as an intern, you don't accrue the same expenses if it's, if you're not in person, but you still have bills, right? And I think that's something that's really important. In terms of advocacy efforts is, we've started conversations in Congress in terms of how can we pump in a lot of money into like some sort of employment or whatever. We're looking at federal agencies. So this is actually the first time we're talking about it publicly, but looking at, can we give a lump sum to each agency just to hire a bunch of people? Because we're not seeing the private sector or the philanthropy kind of collectively come together and be like, we need to solve this. Everyone's kind of doing their own little thing. So that's kind of everything on my end.
Thank you for sharing those stories. They're incredibly moving. I think we even on Symba had a few people reach out that were undocumented and sharing, what is my status as far as a remote internship? Yeah. Because we want to create opportunity and we want to, remove many of those barriers. And we are so much in alignment with you. We have several blog posts and resources around paying interns and say it's a must. What advice do you have for students if they are in an unpaid internship to be an advocate for themselves or educate their employers why unpaid internships should not ever exist again?
So after this, you can pay me because we've actually created a format. We're not able to fund all 1,000 people yet. I'm like hoping. So we actually sent them resources of literally a template that you can offer to your employer. I understand some might still say no, but I've learned like it doesn't hurt to ask. So we have the template basically being like, thank you so much for the opportunity. This is great, but as you know, because of COVID and a lot of financial uncertainty, I was wondering if I can get some sort of compensation. And I think that's really important because as we do this work, it's not enough to just do legislation. The end game is how do you get interns to push back? It'd be like, this is a two-way street. Like, yes, I'm getting some experience, but you're also getting my labor. So how do you empower folks to speak up? And those skills, you're going to use them down the line, especially, for women of color. That pay gap is really bad. And it actually starts as an unpaid intern because you're starting from $0. So learning salary negotiation doesn't hurt. So I think that's very important is, speaking up. It shouldn't hurt. Now, if your employer is like completely offended and everything, like you should think about it, like, should you even be there? But anyways, that's a whole different point. So.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. I think that that is so critical. Like you said, it's a two-way street, and we want to empower youth to know that they have a voice. Like if you are interning at an organization, like that you do have a place there to share those feelings and those thoughts. And this is something that's very, very important. I do want to dive into understanding a little bit about, how we think these long-term effects of COVID will last for the future. I do think that education around unpaid versus paid and interns' rights has become a very important topic for people. Even one of the notions that if you're not being paid, you might not actually have legal rights. And we did some research there, because if you're not being paid, you're not, under the workers' rights of that organization. So first I'll hand it on over to Symba to share, how you think some of these long-term effects are going to impact the workforce, especially remote work, and how you think we're going to adapt after COVID-19.
Of course. So as we can already see, most companies have transitioned to remote because of COVID. We have already heard from big companies like Slack, Square, and Twitter, who have already announced remote work for life to all of their employees. So remote work is definitely trending, and we're seeing that upwards of 70% of all teams in the future will have at least one remote worker. And I think what comes from this is helping companies understand how to access talent in a resourceful way, as well as engage them during the entire work experience. This requires companies to adopt and understand how to operate teams virtually, how to give them the right resources. Do you have to send them computers? Do you have to give them the right equipment in a virtual and send it to their home no matter where they might be located? As well as how do you invest in diverse talent, and how do you invest in talent that will grow to become future leaders at those organizations? Interns are a great way, and that's why we believe in so powerfully in these interns, is because when they engage the right talent in the right way and they're getting paid and compensated for their work, they will grow to be those leaders at those organizations. So now you don't have to only restrict yourself on going to those limited schools, as well as accessing the talent that's in your headquarters city, but how can you make a commitment to hire more diverse talent and be more inclusive? And I think these are definitely some takes that some companies will have to act forward on when it comes to just adapting to the future of work and what that looks like. But after COVID, no one's really sure about what's going to happen. Some companies are letting their employees work remotely till the end of the year. Some companies are letting their employees come back to the office. We know for sure one company like EY mentioned that the interns will not come back to the office until much, much later. But right now, they want to keep their interns in a remote fashion and let the other full-time employees come back to the office, and that too in limited quantities. But I think more of it it'll help understand if companies are able to successfully engage their teams remotely, and as well as keep scaling their workforce to be able to make remote work a success for them.
Yes. How would you respond to someone who says that a remote internship is a subpar experience compared to an in-person experience?
I would definitely disagree. There is definitely differences in an in-person internship versus a remote internship. When you're in the office, you're able to physically meet your colleagues. You're able to go to the coffee room and chit chat about things and go for happy hours after work. But I think that where we are in the world right now, there is technology that's helping bridge that gap and allowing people to communicate and build relationships virtually. It's not, the answer has not been, it's not been solved yet. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement. But I think that as long as an intern really gets to engage, learn more about the company culture, engage with other full-time employees, as well as build relationships with other interns in their cohort, I think that's adding to creating a wholesome experience. And again, it's just another cost savings for the company as well. And it gives the interns flexibility to be able to intern for their dream companies.
Thank you. I think I get really interested in hybrid models. So, models where maybe on Fridays you get to work remotely, or interns work in person in the summer, and maybe when they go back to campus, they have the opportunity to work remotely. And so, Jonathan, I'd like to ask you, do you see hybrid models playing in with MLH? Do you think that, because with Symba, we've noticed that we've been able to scale almost all of our internship programs this summer. And it's been really exciting because companies are like, I don't need to give them a desk. I can create more opportunities. Do you see that in the future of hackathons that you're creating?
Yes, but kind of with a caveat. I think that they serve different purposes, and I actually think that the experience is quite different. Um, I don't think long term that in-person events are going anywhere, and I also don't think in-person office culture is going anywhere. I think that remote work and remote internships as an extension of that are a trend that's here to stay, but I don't think it's mutually exclusive. That's going to be one or the other. I do think it's going to be a hybrid for both like our programs and work in general. Um, One thing I'm hoping to see as some campuses return at least partially in person is hybrid models where the events become more accessible because they have virtual components, even if some of the people are there in person. But you have to be really careful of creating like a tiered experience where it's different depending on how you can engage. Like one of the things I think about a lot is that, you know, I worked as a remote employee for many years for a company, and I thought it was a great experience. I was like a really junior employee. I had access to a lot of the same resources and learnings, you know, just like you're describing. But right now, I'm actually not sure that this is the same thing. I think that like being in quarantine where, you know, you don't necessarily get some of those benefits of being a remote employee, like going out for coffee in the middle of the day to take a break. I think it's a really different experience, and I'm curious to see how companies adapt to that, right? Like, are they going to go for the remote culture that people who work remotely are used to, or are they going to stick to more of this like remote culture emulating in-person work type of thing that's happening right now? And I don't know what's best, but I'm curious to see how that plays out. I think that in terms of like opportunities for students, I think there, in some ways, a lot of new opportunities are being created as a result of this. Like one of the things we've been doing is we launched a open source fellowship program where we are teaching students who lost their internships to contribute to open source software with a paid stipend over the summer, right? And so we have 150 interns essentially that are working to learn how to do open source. And, you know, that program existed as a direct result of uh, a lot of like upheaval, you know, and I think that in some ways, like, there are going to be a lot of unique opportunities coming out of this for students. You know, they may have access to employers or resources or even just goodwill from the community that they might not have had otherwise, because people were kind of focused and stuck with their blinders on in their day-to-day life. So, you know, we'll see. I think it'll. I've talked to a lot of teachers. I've talked to a lot of students. I've talked to a lot of recruiters about what this fall holds and what even the spring holds, and no one knows. You know, it's a moving target.
You brought up a great point, Jonathan, that like this is not really what remote work looks like, right? Before remote work was, you know, you would be able to still go out in the evenings or be able to, you know, walk and be able to do so many other activities that this is like, and we have quite a few friends who are in the remote workspace that are like, don't blame us on remote work, because it almost gets like a negative skew to and positioning, because, you know, you're kind of exhausted from only in person, remote. I know when I did my remote internship, it was like 10 hours a week, and I was able to work and go to school and do a lot of other things, but then my internship kind of lived on top of it. So I think that was a valuable asset, and I think that there's ways that companies will embrace that hybrid model moving forward in the future. I know you shared a little bit about your initiative, and Carlos, you've also shared about the Intern Opportunity Fund. We'd love to hear from you, like how you think others on this call and in the community can support the efforts that you are making. First, I'll pass it on over to Carlos.
Okay. I think the first thing is it's really important to share your story, you know, because I keep on seeing the same thing where, you know, an intern gets internship canceled, whatever, and they don't want to speak about it. And it's like until your voice, you know, gets into the national dialogue, it's very tough to do the work, at least from the advocacy side. That's why, like, I'm a big fan of Anika, your current paid intern, you know, her sharing her story of how she like got her internship terminated while also like her part-time job, right? Like that's really important. The second thing is, you know, donating to the fund, even if it's only $5-10, anything helps, because we're trying to help more people than we currently can. And yeah, so I think those are the two main ways.
Thank you, Carlos. Nikita, do you have things you'd like to share, like initiatives, how people can also support?
Of course. I definitely want to echo what Carlos mentioned about speaking up. It's very important to share your story and to, make others aware of what's happening and what experiences you're going through. When it comes to others supporting, I think just, raising your voice is the number one. And then as well as just being open-minded, as well as just go and learning, what are some ways that you as an intern can probably build upon skills or just be open-minded about what's to come and how to search for opportunities in terms of that.
Yeah. On Symba, we do have like the Symba slate, and students can sign up as well. So that's a great resource. And Jonathan, how can other students get involved with MLH?
Yeah, one of the coolest things that we've seen, and this is kind of the cherry on top of this weird chaos we're all living through. A lot of people who were previously inaccessible as mentors have come out of the woodwork because now they can sit at home on their couch and help someone instead of flying somewhere. And I think that that is a huge opportunity for students to get access to people that they look up to and want to learn from. But it's also an opportunity for students to provide that for other students. I think people often underestimate their own skills and expertise and forget what it was like to be slightly newer than they are now. And I think there's a lot of really valuable learning that can come from you sharing your experience and helping people work through problems who are in a spot that you may have been in just a year ago. And that distance is actually wide enough where you can help them quite a bit. And now that we're remote, it's a really low lift to do that. It might just be a Facebook group that your school has that you post in and offer to get on the phone with someone. There are a lot of really small ways to help there. I think if you're a company, there are an infinite number of initiatives that you can support with your money. Company event budgets went kaput overnight, right? You had promised to spend $1 million on events over this quarter, and now suddenly those events don't exist anymore. And there are a lot of really positive ways you can reallocate that funding to help people. Purely self-servingly, we have a lot of companies who reallocated those budgets towards our open source fellows. Give it to pay your interns, right? There's a lot of initiatives out there that have in some ways replaced what those events offer that you can now fund. And those may be virtual events, but they might be something totally different that you've never done before.
Thank you for sharing that. I totally agree with you. I know there's so much that the private sector can also do to move the needle forward. And our generation wants to work for organizations that do that. So I think it's really telling to see what organizations are standing up to say right now during these critical times and how they are acting. So we are going to move into Q&A very soon. But before we dive into that, I have one final question for all the panelists. And I'll start out with Symba and asking, what kind of advice do you have for students right now who are looking at this job market that is not so beautiful and is a very, very challenging time if they've lost their internship, if they don't have a job yet, if they just graduated and they're trying to figure out, or maybe this is a gap year, any words of wisdom you would share?
Of course. And just like Ava mentioned earlier, and to my point of voicing and sharing your story, definitely share your story on Symba.io as well as Pay Our Interns. But the number one advice that I have is, regardless of what happens this summer, take this time to reflect and understand what are some ways that you can expand your own knowledge when you're at home and you have access to your computer. What are some skills that you can teach yourself that will become marketable in the coming months? It's really hard, when you're sitting with not an internship opportunity, but there are so many different programs online to teach yourself different types of skills. And I think just keeping an open mind and teaching yourself as much as you can throughout the summer is my biggest piece of advice right now.
Thank you. And I know, Jonathan, that was one piece of advice that you did share earlier around, being able to reach out to a lot of people who are now on their couch. Funny enough, that's how I found many of my own remote internships. I went on LinkedIn and I found people that I was inspired by, and I would say, you don't even need to give me a desk. I'd love to be your remote intern. And so people are accessible, and if you're inspired by them, just let them know, like, I love your work and the things that you're doing. Would love to have a 15-minute virtual chat with you. And you'd be surprised. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is they don't respond. The second worst thing that can happen is they say no. So, you put yourself out there. Really, I do encourage that. Jonathan, do you have any other pieces of advice you'd like to share today?
Yeah, I think the only other thing I would say is I would encourage people to get creative about their work experience. These days, most talk is about internships in terms of professional experience. But like, I started college like right before the 2008 financial crisis, and no one was hiring for internships, but there were like part-time job opportunities out there, right? There were a lot of like non-traditional like contract work opportunities. And I think that people can get creative, right? Like, it doesn't have to be that traditional idea of like a 3-month internship that is very structured. A lot of these companies hire throughout the year for smaller roles and junior roles and entry-level roles. And they may not even be like the name brand companies you've heard of. Like, a lot of local businesses face a lot of the same challenges as big organizations. And I would encourage people to kind of step outside their own mental box a little bit and get creative with what opportunities they're pursuing as professional experience and what types of companies they're going after. Because I think that you'd be surprised at like what businesses are growing versus what businesses are hunkering down and cutting roles. They're still out there, and those opportunities do exist. They just may not be in the places that you're looking, or even the places that your school is recommending you look.
Yeah, I was honestly going to give a blended version of both. Like a journalist was like, do you have any inspiring words for people? I'm like, it's shitty time. Like, I don't think there's anything that, you can say that makes it any more reassuring. But I really like what Jonathan said. Like, I mean, you graduated like the same year, like my house got foreclosed. Like, it was a very tough time. I think it really comes down to what you said, Eva, is like, shoot your shot. Honestly, it doesn't hurt to send an email. Like you said, the worst thing that can happen is no. Look at your skills. Like universities, even like Harvard offers like 1,000 courses for free online. Like, so there's so many opportunities, but it really comes down to initiative. And that can't be like, you got to do that, right? There's only so much we can do from our end. And the last part is, while some industries are cutting, some are expanding. Like Cloudflare literally doubled their internship. So you might just have to go more towards that. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, and all of you for joining the conversation. We do have some questions, and feel free, others, to ask questions in the chat. First, we have one question, and I think this might be perfect for Carlos to answer. I typically think of NGOs paving the way for social change. I see we have both NGOs and small businesses on the call. How can the private sector contribute to more equal access to the workforce?
I think Jonathan said it perfectly. I don't know if you guys know Rosa from TikTok. She says, open your purse. Like, that is one way that, the private sector can really help out is, by funding these efforts right now for like nonprofits and everything. So I think that's one of the main ways. Because I don't just think it's NGOs doing great work. It's also in the private sector. It really comes down to both. So.
Yes. And I even think that on this call, like the Save Internship campaign is like a perfect example of how, a for-profit startup has worked together with you to create advocacy and awareness and, bringing, groups together. Something that startups can tell you is, we're small, but we have to, and so we join forces with others to be able to create more impact and spread the word. So I think that that's also really, really important, to join forces together and bring us together. The next question we have is, what do you think of the credibility of remote internships versus externships versus other free and virtual professional development tools? Maybe, Jonathan, if you want to chime in here, if you think that, the credibility of maybe hackathons has changed at all, or any thoughts you might have.
I mean, I think some of the value of an internship versus the other things you're describing is perceived value, not real value. I think that having a name of a company on your resume carries more weight than maybe it should versus something that you've worked through yourself on your own time. I do think that, like, I mean, I completely agree with everyone else here that, like, I don't love, and I am generally against the idea of unpaid internships or professional like work. Like, you shouldn't be doing work for a company for free. However, there are a lot of ways to get professional experience outside of internships that are not that, right? Learning online through free classes, contributing to open source projects where someone isn't, you know, profiting off of them, but still professional experience, working with a mentor that you look up to who just wants to help you maybe on your own side project. Like, there's a lot of places you can engage here that aren't traditional internships. In terms of credibility, you're honestly going to have to do more work marketing what you did if it's not a name brand internship, right? Like, it is going to be a harder, more nuanced conversation with that next recruiter you talk to when you explain why you did a side project instead of an internship. I think that that stigma is unfounded in reality, but it exists in the real world, right? People have it whether or not they should. So that's what I would say there. But
yeah, I think you nailed it, Jonathan, on that answer. I think, you know, the key takeaway from today, I'm going to take away, and then I hope everyone else does, is like, get creative, like, think outside the box. There are, you know, the world is your oyster. And I think with remote work and how we're all now kind of inside, we are more connected than ever. So there is a lot of great channels to reach out and meet a lot of other individuals. So thank you all so much for joining today's discussion about getting creative, about being resourceful during this time. It's really nice to come together when it seems like a lot of things are falling apart and really difficult to share what solutions are coming together at this time. So this will be recorded, but just wanted to say again, thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you so much, Carlos, for joining us today, and Nikita, and especially for the amazing impact that you're having in the community.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.